Okay. So officially welcoming Raj with us, and thanks so much for your talk earlier. It was really powerful, and thanks for being with us now. So I know you introduced yourself a little bit already, but I don't know if you want to do another tiny little introduction, anything that you haven't told us.
Bought a bike today. It's the last one in the country, apparently. I mean, there's that, and I managed to convince my wife to buy it on her credit card, which I'm quite impressed with. So winning.
Winning at life.
Yeah.
So, well, we can. This conversation can go wherever we'd like it to go. I think. And so, why don't we just start with the first one that popped into the chat, and we can kind of go from there. If there's anything that's been stirred up from the things that Raj shared earlier, or not, we can see. So, Ellie and Ali want to ask, why C of E?
So, I'm Ordinand with the Church of England, and that is something my friends and I, little group that we are, from different colleges, ask ourselves probably every week at a different. We do like this cycle where one's up and it's like, no, it's fine, we can do something here, and the other one's like, no, we just need to burn the place down. Why C of E? That's a really good question. It was strangely when we moved to the Isle of Wight, we went church shopping, and as you do when you move into a new place, and it was before we had the kids. My wife and I, we went into the parish church, and it was everything we did not like. It was hymn books, organ, robes, stuffy, every mean age of 900. We brought that kind of stuff, and we just looked at each other and felt like, and said, this feels like home. It's everything we've rejected as growing up. It's everything that we didn't want, but actually we had this sense of setting anchor, and that's where we stayed. And then basic discernment. I had a conversation with someone about a Bible study group. Obviously we'd moved about and the kids had come about, and having a Bible study group in the same parish. And that vicar said to me, she didn't answer the question. She said, I think you should be a priest. And I laughed, but I also thought, oh, this is a good idea. And so that's when the process started. And do you have that thing where the more you learn about a place, the more you're like, okay. And so I moved to theological college because, I was like, hey, cool, evangelical means reading your Bible. And then you turn out and you go, okay, I learned about what evangelicalism can be like at the certain college that I was at. But I've always been deeply Anglican, and my grandmother's in a very conservative Anglican church in Malaysia. But that was amazing because as a kid, you'd see the Bible always being used. And we always grew up Anglican, so it always feels like home. So that's like that question, why C of E? That has like a whole load of tension inside it. We could just pull this out for an hour. And people ask me why stay in the C of E. And I come back to, if you've seen Mad Max Fury Road, you can wave, or if you haven't, I might just give you some spoilers. But basically, goodness, I'm waving. I won't spoil the film, but I'll use the image of a well, because there's this well in the desert, and that's where the water is. And what we've got is somehow the people around the well have become excluding, but you're in a desert and it's the only place the water's at. That's not to dismiss other Christian groups or anything like that. It just feels like, well, why should I go? Because, you don't affirm what I believe. And this radical, inclusive Christianity that I see when I read the gospel, but people don't see. Why should it be me? If you want to exclude yourself, mate. And so I become more and more hopeful when I see other people in the Church of England who have that same sort of, guys, why are we reading the same Bible? And I feel more and more frustrated when I see things that can feel like sticking plasters that try to resolve some of these issues without doing the deeper work. So like this week, so my dissertation is on racism in the Church of England, but I actually, I've it hasn't been published or anything, but I think this is a killer line where I say, like, if racism's the branch, exclusive theology and excluding theology is the root. And I use the phrase Christo-fascist because there's a theologian who uses that, because you have people who use the Bible politically, who exclude, and I'm using European terms of reference because I grew up in London. I was born in Bracknell, I think. And you know, you're excluding the same people who are in Auschwitz. Like, there's something wrong with your theology. If you trace all these things back. So when Living in Love and Faith came out in the Church of England, the CEEC video that went out, I didn't watch it. I did this for personal. I put it on mute and I counted how many people I knew on the video from when I was at Wycliffe, and it was 13. And then I also looked at how many people on that video are on other Anglican forums talking about, oh, well, racism's bad, we need to be inclusive. So on what grounds is your inclusion? Which is where I think we have to talk about what we actually believe. Because if Jesus has said, hey, here's communion, if you're broken, come and be together and find wholeness, he said it with no ifs or buts like all of these memes say on the internet. No, there was no stuttering. It's just, here is love, come if you're broken. Like the Episcopal Church in the States has those beautiful calls to communion. You know, Nadia Bolz-Weber has that. And so Nadia is a really good role model for me, because I went to see her in Southwark Cathedral a couple of years ago, and she was like, you make a choice. You either stay in the organization and challenge, or you break out of the organization and you're free, but you throw those stones, and you challenge in that way, but you're either inside or outside. And, you know, either side is going to have a compromise, and either side, so she feels like she's outside of the church. Those of us inside feel compromised, but you make a choice. So that's sort of how I stay in the Church of England. And then there's one last point on this question. So there's, I've got two of them actually. Kenneth Leach was a great old inclusive priest in the East End. I never knew him, but I've come across his work, and he writes about places I used to walk around. And he was blessing same-sex marriages in the 70s, same-sex relationships in the 70s. And he was, you know, his point is very similar. Like, you do what God's calling you to do in the day, and then you reflect on the theology in the night. And there was a time, because he's writing about the East End, when the National Front are like opening offices there. And there's a time when the National Front have been in Bethnal Green, and on the patch that they were on, he does the Anglican liturgy of exorcism to clear away the evil. And I just see that so powerfully as a man who's there as a representative of the church that is there for the country, for every single person in the country. That's what he was compelled to do, to show solidarity with others. How powerful is that? And like, to me, that's what a priest should be doing. That's the call that I feel drawn to. So yeah, does that cool.
That was a great answer for like a 3-word question.
I'm a chatterbox. I used to teach.
David, I wonder if you want to ask that follow-up question. I don't know how much of it Raj has answered, or if you want to follow up anyway.
Yeah, I'm just checking that, because Nets and I are in the same room. Yes, it's working without feedback. Yes, I think going back to what you're saying about it was right at the beginning now, the lack of inclusion hurts the gospel, is what you said at the beginning. And I just wondered, that immediately makes me think, well, what is the gospel? How would you summarize it? What do you see that? And how is it being currently harmed? You've mentioned a few ways already, I think, but how does that relate into what you see the actual message is? We often talk about our message being of radical inclusion, but I wondered how you might summarize that gospel message.
Thank you. So I start with, like, the gospel is love. And when you have those conversations where people are saying, well, prove to me God, you're like, well, have you feel love for people? You feel what the absence of love, you can like hate people. You feel what, you know what love is. And the source of that love comes from somewhere. That love is God. And the gospel is that you can have access, that, you know, that love is for you. You know, here, back at the well again. And so to me, that's that inclusive love is almost like, I used to say when I was 16, the gospel is love. And then you suddenly realize that, you know, you have to say it's inclusive love, because people have hijacked it to mean other things. So, and that means it's for everyone. And I find it like, so my family have lots of, on my dad's side, have loads of different religions. There's Buddhists, there's, because he's one of it, he's a clan, Buddhists, Muslims, Hindus, etc. Like, so, not really Hindu or Sikh. There's like other break-off religions that we kind of like, when it was someone's wedding, they didn't know how many times to walk around the fire, so they did like 7 because they were covered 5. That's the kind of like, and how easy they take it. And so what happens when my granddad dies, who wasn't Christian? Like, and what does your theology do with that? And so when I was at the first theological college, I asked the principal that, and he gave me a little bit of a wishy-washy answer. But you look at the Catholic Church, and for all of the tensions and problems, they have a very clear way of relating Jesus to other religions, which is all religions have light, all religions have love. That's true, because, you know, there are some amazing things happening in coronavirus times with Muslims, and but so all of them have the light, but the source of that light is Jesus. And you think, well, we can work with that. And so if that's the gospel, you know, here is the source of light, here is a source of love. Like, I find anything that, when people try and wrap a flag around the Bible and say, oh no, this is our land, and then use it exclusively, that to me, that harms the gospel, because you've taken a love without borders and stuck borders around it. When people say, oh no, I don't imagine that this comes anywhere near some of the impression people in the room have had. But when 3 of us wore rainbow lanyards, and then an edict came to say you can't wear a lanyard at the front of the chapel in this theological college, not Cuddesdon, at Whitcliffe, and people wouldn't talk to you because you were wearing the lanyard, and people would, you know, act differently around you. That's harming the gospel, because they don't like the lanyard because it shows difference, and they don't like the difference because what they've done is they've taken a neatly ordered world that they've created and then put the gospel the Bible at the top of that pyramid, because they're starting with this sense of, you know, it's called foundationalism. They're starting with a set of truths that you can always prove, and then they're saying, well, hetero cis is the truth, and anything less than that is false, and the Bible tells me so, and so they put the Bible there. Whereas if you look at the Bible, you know, I could argue it's genocidal because there are psalms that are genocidal, and you go back to, well, the psalmist was angry because of, you know, that they're human. That's the whole point. And you also have Jesus, how Jesus interacts with people and how God interacts with people, because God goes, oh yeah, these people are bad, boom, next part of this narrative, that certain group are saving people. Oh yeah, Samaritans are bad, but oh look, Jesus chills with them for 2 days and then rocks on. And so it's a radical, it's subversive and radical, this love that we have. And why, if you've tasted that and you know that, you wouldn't, you wouldn't poison it. And so I do wonder why people do that. And I think it's because they're using power, and they're using the Bible as a means of power over people. I mean, there was a group that used to, a Christian group that used to come into our school. I was in secondary school, every Friday, but they were great, and they wanted Christians, and they were scooping up the kids, chatting to them about Jesus, stuff like that. But then once a kid said, oh no, actually I'm questioning my sexuality, I'm exploring who I am, boom, dropped cold. And that's not that inclusive radical love that we've all tasted. That's not the Jesus who's gone, do you know what, I am here for you, even though you have all you're all in the crowd. None of you have got my back. None of you offering to carry the cross, if we were there at that time. And that's the radical love that Jesus shows at the heart of the gospel. Like, I see you and I love you anyway, and I love you wholly, and actually the reason you're hurt is because the world has hurt you. So come to me and be healed. I remember there was somebody whose sister was gay, and because she's passed away now, and she didn't know how to hold that in her calling in the Bible college she's at, as she's training to be a priest. And you think, why should you hold back part of who you are because that's not what God called you to. Does that make sense? And yeah, that love. And the world needs love. Like, you just look around and, all of the work that you do as a teacher, everything goes to teachers, safeguarding, prevent, all of this stuff goes to teachers. And you see again and again, people are looking for love. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for value. And they look in all these different places and end up in places that can be hard and isolating and lonely. And I just think, imagine if every church had this radical love. Like, if we were speaking about, do you know what? Here you go. Here is this radical love. And also here is this radical love that forgives and allows you and calls you not only to forgive others, because that's well easy, but it's easier than forgiving yourself. And like looking in the mirror and going, yeah, you failed or you messed up. Forgive yourself, come and be whole. That's the love that we're called to. The love that says, all right, you're on your way to the temple, but you've got problems with Danielle because she's been moaning about her garden again. Turn around and just say, look, Danielle, you were really irritating me, but we got to have this straight out. It's saying stop and be in communion with each other. And I think, because that was one of the things, where as you're writing about racism, as you're writing about exclusion, you think, okay, so where does this go? And I was genuinely stuck, because it's like, oh, we just replaced the theology. And you go, oh, that doesn't sound right. And then you get two different authors. So Kenneth Leach writing in the 70s, and then William Jennings writing in like 2010. And they both end in communion. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, one's really Catholic coming at it, calling it the Mass and Eucharist. And then the other's really sort of evangelical, calling it communion, communion, being in communion with each other. And it's all of those things. It's, being right with God and being right with each other, like that cross. And yeah, I think if the Church of England, therefore, to go back to that first question as well, if it has a presence, if there, you can guarantee there is a church in every single community, that there's on the map, there's a church for you that is allocated to you, and you can have your life moments, your weddings, your funerals, your christenings there. Even if you've got nothing to do with the church, you can just rock in and ask for those things. Imagine how wonderful it would be, and how amazingly radical that would be, if it suddenly stood up and went, actually, we're going to speak into these things and speak into the exclusion that people feel because of their color, because of their sexuality, because of their gender. Like, and it just baffles me when people are like, oh yeah, I'm on the insert race, gender, sexuality thing, but, and there's a but. Why are you putting a but there for? Yeah. I'm just checking over. I think, does that help?
Yes, very good. Yeah, very helpful.
Does anyone else have a question they want to throw at Raj?
Yeah,
Hey.
so I do. Sorry, I missed part of the talk because I'm somewhere else. But I think that this is kind of a comment and question together. But like just talking about that, like people wanting to find that place where they can grow, like be included and have a space for them. Something that's like horribly, bitterly ironic I've been reading about in the States is that one of the reasons that white supremacist groups in the United States are growing is because that's been offered to people as that kind of a space. And so, like, for like, especially young white men who are feeling grieved, and, you know, I would hope that the church would be a better space for people than that space. So I just wondered if you had thoughts or comments on that.
Yeah, that's so because I I nearly said this really badly. I nearly said I'm big on fascism, which is not what I'm trying to say at all. It's like, I follow lots of anti-fascist movements because if you're using the phrase Christo-fascist, there has to be engagement with that. And when the race report came out, I was really interested in the pushback because, you know, my wife is white, and if I sit here going, oh yeah, white supremacy or white people are racist, you know, I ain't gonna have dinner. Although there's a gender dynamic there, apart from she doesn't like me rearranging the kitchen. And when the race report came out and didn't engage with an inclusive theology, it didn't say anything about, to me, and I scan read it, it didn't say anything about accepting people as they are. You end up isolating people. So you could see I had white working class people in the Church of England going, but I'm not racist and I don't have it easy. But actually this, what feels to them the race card, is a thing of exclusion, and it feels like a hammer that's going to be used on their heads. And I get that, because I don't think it's race alone. And I think that coming back to the whole, you know, a place where people can feel welcome, and that lure for white supremacists, because I love using Discord. And I was like, oh, I built a Discord server for a church, and church turned around and said, oh yeah, but white supremacists use that. And I was like, well, what have you seen Donald Trump on Twitter? Because he wasn't the time. Like, we're all using Twitter without questioning it. But that space where people can be welcomed, if you look at what you see when you know, Hope Not Hate and the information that they pull out on white supremacy and the radicalization of the right, people are going there because they've given up on hope, and so there's a space to be with others and to be united by hate. And I was sat here when they launched the 2021 State of Hate report, and they were talking about how, oh, we need hopeful towns. We're going to look at the most at risk, where Britain First, the English Defence League, all of that are working the most, are targeting, and we Hope Not Hate are going to be there and work in the community and help them, because the things that are leading to their isolation are, you know, unemployment, not being able to access, you know, food, you know, basic things. And they were saying this, and I was sat there going, there's a flipping church there. What's the church doing apart from giving people tea and biscuits at the end of it, or being on, like, no offense, being on Zoom? I know we all are on Zoom, but not doing anything more. And I remember thinking, if this is like, if we've got a charity that's saying, you know, you've got Muslims and Jewish religious leaders on this Hope Not Hate saying we need to give people something to hope. And I'm like, and also, by the way, here's this guy, Jesus, who forgives forgives your sins and loves you. Like, what does that love look like in real life? And what does that love look like in real life for those people? And if we have an image of what that looks like, then we have an image of what the church and what we should be doing. And that's why I think the idea of the destination becomes important, because you can say, and I'll speak from the race thing and the working class thing, oh, there's nothing for working class, there's nothing for this is where I am, and I get that, but at some point you have to turn around and say, well, we're going here. And I think the destination is quite important for some of the churches. I can think of like 10 in Oxford that, okay, let's just put our things on the window. So if you turn around and say, who's included in your church, then we go back to what the pubs in the 1980s used to have, which would say no blacks, no gays, no travelers. We'll put that theology on your wall and see, so it's clear, so people know what's there. And people won't do that because they know that doesn't bring people in, because it's fundamentally exclusive. I know a church that, so the benefice, so it's the same vicar but two different church councils, and one church council said in the benefice, yeah, we're an inclusive church, and they joined the network. And the other church, even though it's as inclusive, said, but we are inclusive, we're Christian. They should change what they put on there. Other people should change what you should say you're an exclusive church because you're misusing the name of Jesus. So that conversation went so far, even though they're equally inclusive, they had that dynamic. And I think in that you see the value of both. You see, like, saying where you are at, and also saying, but this is the future, this is what we're pointing towards. So yeah, because I do think of there's so many differences in what's being reported. So you can say, that on the one hand, Black and Asian kids do statistically better than white working class kids in exams because it's a double blind system. But then you come through and there's the clear bias on employment within the Church of England. And so as a teacher, what's different about white working class children, and as a priest in the Church of England, what's different about the church? And I remember growing up in East London. We were a rubbish school. We were trying to be shut down by Ofsted, and as a student, and then and what some government initiative happened, which was called Change in the City, and they invested into schools in deprived areas. But what became clear as a teacher then reading into it was all of the investment was shared equally, because you can't go up to a kid and go, here's your worksheet, oh, the funding's not for you, when it was for a whole school. And so that helped improve white working class outcomes. So what can we learn from those kinds of images and it to help make churches more inclusive, and being places that share hope, that radical hope that people, if they don't have the access to that, they give up on and choose to hate. Does that help, Faith?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Open it up for anybody else. I have one or two questions brewing in my brain.
When I was on the Isle of Wight, I was in East Cowes and I worked in Newport.
I was like, oh, going back like half an hour.
Yeah, thank you. I went to school at Carrisbrook, but they've pulled it down now. Can I ask, Raj, I'm aware that a lot of what you said is kind of place-based, and we're very geographically scattered, or a lot of us are, and I'm wondering how we can put those sorts of principles into practice on that basis. I'm not saying that you necessarily know the answer to that, but I'm just saying that there's a challenge there, and I just wondered if you had any thoughts on it.
Yeah, that's and and also like the idea of new expressions and like long-standing expressions as well. So like there's a certain church movement, the Anglo-Catholic Socialist Group, and one of the lessons that I've taken from the conversations there is plugging into what's local to you. And so for some people, like doing things to make the world better involves starting something fresh. And for some people, it's plugging into something or joining a dot that's not been joined and going, hey, do you know, like, I mean, even how I've got here, it's Luke Lana going, hey, you're ranting about this in the comment room and there's red letter Christians, get involved. And then from that, you get involved, you end up, you come here. And it's, I think it's being open. Sometimes we forget the baby steps of things, which is like Googling like charity near me to help or organization near me, because we get so drawn into the vision, and then sometimes we can become exclusive ourselves, and saying things like, oh well, you know, they use Hillsong, I'm not going to get involved with them. It was like, it's a food bank, you're going to have to like make a decision here. And discerning from that, like this, I think especially moving into, so I'm at the end of my time in Oxford, and in sometime in June I'll move to Curacy in Portsmouth, and already like part of me is excited at the groups I could join, because Hope Not Hate have a group in that part of the world, but also I know that the church that I'll be serving in doesn't do the whole smells thing, which I quite like. And there's a side of my spirituality that's from a diaspora group, which is a sort of an online Zoom church thing, which will feed into that. But also as a cyclist and as a Christian, you know, and being me, there's always like room for interfaith. So I'm also thinking about, well, there's also like the Portsmouth cycling campaign, because you want to make the streets safe for children, and that's eco, and you know, being anything good for the environment is kind of like part of being a Christian, but it doesn't have to have, you know, Jesus Christ PLC stuck on the side for you to get involved in. And there are so every area has that differently, because every area has its unique characteristics, and every area is beautifully unique. So, you know, I remember when I was teaching, especially on the island, if I wanted to sound angry, I'd bang on an East London, I'd overemphasize my East London emphasis, and the kids would be like, and so seeing what's there to root into, and if there's nothing to root into, there's probably some like-minded people who would come together. Yeah.
I was thinking about when you were kind of drawing together a couple of the comments about how relationships are so important to everything, and this whole sometimes like there's the big statements, and there's the time where you need to kind of put your colors on the wall and say, this is where I stand, and that's going to be uncomfortable for some people. And then there's alongside that the relationships with people day to day, that through knowing one another, our rough edges get kind of sanded off, and we learn about difference, and we learn about, you know, we learn how to do better by one another. And I don't know if there's a question in there, but just thinking about like even what that means for a church that's so spread out like ours, and versus a local expression of church, I think some of those principles still apply, don't they? Because I think we've seen this last year how our friendships are real. You know, they're not less real because many of us haven't actually met. They're real, and creating that context where we can kind of lean into the awkwardness together, I think is so important. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on like how, you know, I think so much of it is so much of like some of those difficult conversations around race and gender and sexuality are about people being willing to lean into what's awkward, to have the conversations in the first place. And I don't know that how you make somebody do that if they don't want to, because it's almost like in my life, that's like part of my discipleship, is that willingness to lean in listen. Do you have, I don't know, maybe you
Yeah,
can respond to that.
I think, and I think, I wouldn't normally quote Vaughan Roberts, but there was one useful thing he said in one of our lectures when I was at Wycliffe, which was, there are things that feed you and there are things that draw from you. And at the end of the day, try and balance what feeds you and what draws from you. And that's a really helpful image from someone who you wouldn't necessarily sit down and have a cup of tea with. And I think finding those groups that feed you is so important, and like groups that are online is probably the future, because I was talking about the sodality for priests, and this group and RLC, where you can come together and be like, oh, do you know what, that person on Twitter, they're here and they just get it, and you feel that relief that there's other people who are like nodding their heads when you're saying there's an inclusive radical love that we've tasted, and you're like, yeah. And so I think that will feed you for the other side of what you've asked, which is leaning into those awkward spaces. And that in communion you have that cycle of repentance and forgiveness, and repentance and forgiveness kind of assume you're going to get it wrong. So as you were saying that, I was thinking back to when I was 16. I had a job as a caretaker in the same secondary school that I went to, and one of the occasional staff there watched as some of the Black Afro-Caribbean cleaners came in, and he said something like something properly offensive, so I'm just giving you the warnings, about oh look, here come the silver blacks or something. And then he chanted later on, I have a similar memory, how time molds these things, of him singing the literal, send the buggers back, they're not what I ordered white, not black. And I stood with him, and he's like, oh, but not you, Raj, you're different, you're just like us. And I was like, well, yeah, we all are. And I was like 16 at the time, so I wasn't going to like take him out. But that was an awkward space to be in. And I think for me, that's the image that you're sort of reaching into, Danielle. But there's also self-care is like a radical act of resistance, and knowing that you're not called to be in those situations if you're, if it doesn't help you. So, and that's a very difficult line, and I can only describe it as like bumper cars, where things are going to bump into you and push you back, and there'll be times when you need to like step out and step off the ride and go, I need to just heal. And there are times when you have to go in, but you don't have to turn up to every fight, is the other thing I think that speaks into that. So
I was thinking how, like, I mean, there is that kind of awkwardness that's leaning into people that have vastly different kinds of views of the world from you, but then there's also the awkwardness of just being proper friends with people that are different, and being willing to be open to when someone says, well, actually the way that you said that hurt me, or that language, that word that you used to describe me isn't right, like how that's part of knowing one another properly.
I think I get that. I think that's kind of like why people hate theological college, is because you have this broad range of people who are so different and so deeply different, and finding your way among them can be really hard. And so living in community, I think, can be hard. And I think sometimes we try and like make everything is awesome, Lego movie music, and actually sometimes we have to say it can feel like the world's Mad Maxy, and that's when you need to rest in Jesus.
Sure. That feeds into Ellie and Elliot a question. What feeds you?
Like McDonald's. So,
because you are going to get knocked back quite, I mean,
and so I was thinking like, there's so many things, but I'm actually going to share like the just genuine, real things. Like, Like, we started off talking about a bike, and like genuinely going for a bike ride has always fed me. It's always been like, okay, get your mind out, being out in, for me, forests. I love a forest. I don't know why. There's just something. It must be like the oxygen overload that feeds me and just clears my mind. And there's that, and the cycle of prayer that we kind of have to do as trainee priests in the Church of England. We're all meant to do morning and evening prayer, but having that space where you can listen to God. So someone put me onto the Pray As You Go app, because therefore, if you're lazy, you can just click play. They're sort of the things that feed me, and making sure you have quality time. I think that's really powerful. So clearly, between when we did the video and today, I went for a haircut. And, that kind of pampering, which we kind of tend to think is, oh no, it's not good for you. Like, you should be doing something. You should be in the food bank. What are you getting your haircut for? That's actually a moment when you get to feed and take on stuff, and, your tank gets filled up. Yeah.
Very good. Sam had a question. Sam, are you happy to ask your question?
Of course. So I'm a disabled wheelchair user as well as bi. So I've kind of grown up with a lot of different kind of exclusion things, but I was just wondering if you hadn't much experience with like disability inclusion, if you knew of any good organisations that are useful to get involved with, if so.
Oh, thanks, Sam. So it's really interesting. There was a Twitter feed I was watching, like, I think it was today, where the author was arguing against using the phrase, arguing with a parent who the parent wanted to use the phrase special needs, and the disabled Twitter person was saying, well, no, and this is the feedback from our community, and we are a community, so listen to us because it's our lived experience. I'm dyslexic, and so suddenly there's this whole world where, and I didn't realize until 2018. So my Hebrew teacher said, I think you're dyslexic. So I've gone through university, I've got a PhD, done teaching, masters, and suddenly gone, all you lot are mad. And then I went for the test, and then the gent said, you are dyslexic. And then you have this whole sense of, or I had in this example, this sense of, who am I? And then realizing, no, this is who I am. You change the words around. But in that, it's really strange, because you realize that the world isn't the monochrome world that you saw, and you didn't realize it was monochrome. You didn't realize that you were just doing things as a neurotypical person, and you don't realize that, I'm using the mic that I use for Dragon Dictate, and then I use Dragon Dictate and go, what? These people find typing this easy. These essays are this easy. And you stop thinking that you're cheating. And I always found as a teacher, and I always find even more so as a student now, because I'm banging on to everyone about, if you think you're dyslexic, get tested, because it will help, it will make life just, it will give you equality. There's this picture that comes out sort of every now and again of, you might have seen it, Sam, where it's the steps and a ramp, and it's snow covered, and the caretaker's cleaning the steps, and the wheelchair user's waiting there going, but if you clear the ramp, we can all get up. And people haven't made that jump yet, and it's bonkers, because I remember speaking from a really selfish, I already said I'm efficient or lazy, depending on whether you like me or not. When you're planning a lesson for Ofsted, you have to show that you've done all this stuff for every person who's in the room. So then I was like, well, let's look at all the possible people who could be in the room. You take a bit of time. Then let's look at what they need. And then you realize, if someone's English as additional language, you have to use Google Translate for some of this stuff. Regardless of disability, what you end up with is the same thing. There's a commonality, which is short, sharp chunks, not a lot of talking from the front, lots of experiential learning, lots of getting your hands on, lots of doing it. So, and it's the same. And even though we're different, you know, there's a commonality, and it's about reaching for the least of these. And actually you find that what you do for the least of these, which is, you know, Cornel West talking about the gospel, you're doing for everyone, because everyone needs that. So I find that college now, I'm still banging on about, oh, well, you know, we need to be inclusive. We need to think about people. We need to have, you know, Zoom doesn't have live captions unless you pay for Otter. We need to, and my daughter's teaching herself to read. She's 6 now. And she worked out how to get the computer to read what she was being asked to read online. And I thought that's really clever, but I also thought, how amazing is this tech that's really accessible? When you ask for organizations, I can't think of any off of the top of my head. Are you thinking about like church and disability?
Yeah, so because there are a lot more barriers, it can feel like even nowadays, I mean, things have progressed a lot. My parents had to go to extreme lengths just to get a ramp put into the church where I was growing up in. So things have definitely improved a lot. But yeah, any like Christian organizations that also deal with disability, it would just be useful to know about or check out sometime.
There's there's like Katie Tup on Twitter. So there's like and Disability and Jesus. They're like the 2 Twitter handles that I would search. That would be like the first step if I was like trying to find more information on that stuff in the C of E. So like I hope those are leads if you haven't had them, because Katie is the disability rep in Oxford, and she's adamant that we don't say virtual church, and she's saying that nationally because virtual makes it sound like it's not real, and this conversation that we are having is real. And some people who are housebound, you know, this is church. And so why should we be ableist and go, oh no, it's not real communion unless you're like rocking in, when your church has like 15 steps to get into it. And so they use the phrase online, and that's a lesson to me again. And that comes back to Danielle's point about, you know, there are times when you're going to end up knocking into people, but it's about being loving and being gracious in that, you know, because I would have said virtual church, and then you get that pushback and you go, I'm sorry. I hadn't seen it that way before. And that's the whole point, because we just see the world even more beautifully and see all the colors when other people turn out and go, you know, that's lime green, not just green. You know, you get to see the difference. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
And Sam, I think that, I mean, it's something that we're going to explore much more. And in a few weeks, David Nankel is going to do the kind of first talk on disability and inclusion. And then I think it's an area that we want to, it's not just one thing, is it? There's like so many different layers that we can explore. And that's the hope that will happen. And you and I will have more conversations about it too. So it's about 10 past, so we're probably going to aim to wrap up in the next couple of minutes, but I wonder if anybody has any last questions they'd like to ask Raj, or anything that you'd like to say.
Thank you for your talk. And thank you for your time. It was really great and really encouraging.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Nets, I think we might have been at the same school on the island. Was it Trinity?
No, I went to Carisbrooke.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was Trinity that I worked at, or what used to be Trinity. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your time, and we'll have you back again if you'd come back again. And you can always kind of come hang out with us if you ever need a little top up of radically inclusive loving from a community, you know. So we really appreciate you, and it's been brilliant. So thanks so much. And
And thank you for being so honest. It's really nice when people are normal and talk like they're real people. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Somebody's asked me to help talk to the church, and I meant to have someone help me, and they were like, "Oh, I don't know how to be," and I was like, "Well, I'm just going to be myself," and they're going to be super disappointed. To talk about faith and science in the church, they're like, I'm just going to be me.
yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
None of that church voice.
Yeah.
None of that preacher voice. I hope I don't do it. Oh, don't tell me if I do. Anyway, thanks so much, Raj, and thanks everybody. We'll see you soon, okay?
Thank you.
Bless.
Enjoy the rest of the
Bye.
sunshine. Okay.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.